David stared at his computer screen until his eyes burned. The clock showed 2:15 a.m., and he was still typing his research paper about sleep problems. Empty coffee cups covered his small desk, and textbooks were scattered everywhere in his tiny apartment near the college. He rubbed his tired eyes and decided to finally go to bed. His apartment was on the second floor of an old building, and everything creaked when he walked around. The neighbors were quiet at this hour, which he liked. David preferred peace and silence when he studied. After brushing his teeth and changing into his pajamas, he turned off all the lights except for his phone charger, which gave off a small blue glow near his bed. He pulled the covers over himself and closed his eyes, hoping to get at least 5 hours of sleep before his morning classes. The apartment was completely silent, except for the old heating system making soft noises. David was just starting to drift off when something felt different. It was like someone had walked into his room, even though he knew the door was locked with a chain from the inside. Then, his mattress moved. David's heart jumped in his chest. Someone was climbing onto his bed. He could feel the weight shifting as whoever it was moved slowly under his covers. His whole body went stiff with fear, but he couldn't make himself move or speak. The person next to him was warm, and he could hear soft breathing. Then he smelled something sweet, like flowers blooming in spring. It was jasmine, a scent his grandmother used to wear when he was little. David wanted to turn on the light, but his arm felt frozen. His mind raced with questions. How did someone get into his locked apartment? Who was this person? What did they want? Then he heard his name. David. The voice was soft and gentle, like a whisper in the wind. It was a woman's voice, and somehow it sounded familiar, like he had heard it before but couldn't remember where. The way she said his name made him feel strange. Not exactly scared, but confused and curious at the same time. Finally, David forced himself to reach for the lamp on his bedside table. His hand shook as he fumbled for the switch. When the light suddenly filled the room, he blinked hard and looked around. Nobody was there. He was completely alone in his bed. The covers were messed up where someone had been lying, but the space next to him was empty. David jumped up and checked every corner of his small apartment. He looked under the bed, in the tiny closet behind the bathroom door. Nothing. The front door was still chained from the inside, just like he had left it. The window was closed and locked tight. There was no way for anyone to get in or out without him knowing. But that sweet jasmine smell was still in the air. David sat on the edge of his bed, trying to make sense of what just happened. His sheets felt damp, like someone with wet skin had been lying there. He touched the spot where he thought the person had been, and it was definitely warmer than the rest of the bed. Maybe he was going crazy from too much studying and not enough sleep. David had read about people having hallucinations when they were really tired, but this felt so real. He could still smell the jasmine perfume, and the mattress still seemed to hold the shape of another person. He got up and walked to the window, looking down at the empty street below. A few streetlights made long shadows on the sidewalk, but everything was quiet and still. No one was walking around at this hour. David went back to bed but couldn't fall asleep for the rest of the night. He kept thinking about the woman's voice and how she knew his name. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the feeling of someone climbing into his bed and whispering to him. When morning came, David felt exhausted and confused. He made coffee and tried to focus on getting ready for school, but his mind kept going back to what happened in the middle of the night. During his shower, he wondered if he should tell someone about it. But what would he say? That a mysterious woman appeared in his locked apartment and then vanished? People would think he was having a mental breakdown or making up stories. David decided to keep quiet about it for now. Maybe it really was just a dream caused by stress and too much caffeine. He had been working on his research paper for weeks without much rest, so his brain might be playing tricks on him. But as he got dressed and grabbed his backpack, that sweet jasmine smell seemed to follow him around the apartment. And when he made his bed, he noticed that his pillow still had an indent where someone else's head might have been resting. Walking to campus that morning, David couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened to him. Something that would change everything, even though he didn't understand what it meant yet. The woman had seemed so real, so present in his room, and the way she whispered his name, it wasn't scary or threatening. It was almost like she was trying to tell him something, or maybe asking for help. David spent the whole day thinking about those few strange minutes in his dark bedroom, not knowing that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine. 3 nights passed without anything strange happening. David started to believe it really had been just a weird dream. He caught up on his sleep and felt more normal during his classes. But on Friday night it happened again. This time, David was more awake when he felt someone climbing into his bed. He had gone to sleep earlier, around midnight, so his mind was clearer. The mattress dipped down as the mysterious woman settled next to him under the covers. David forced himself to stay calm and pay attention to every detail. She was definitely there. He could feel her body heat and hear her soft breathing. The jasmine smell filled his room again, sweet and strong. When she whispered his name, he tried to see her face in the darkness. In the dim light from his phone charger, he could make out the shape of a woman with long dark hair. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s. There was something on her forehead, a small mark or scar above her left eyebrow that caught what little light there was. David reached slowly toward the lamp, trying not to scare her away. But just like before, the moment the light came on, she was gone. The bed was empty, the room was empty, but that sweet perfume smell lingered in the air for almost an hour. The next morning, David made a decision. He was going to figure out what was happening to him. He went to the electronics store and bought a small camera that could record in the dark. He also downloaded a voice recording app on his phone and set it to start recording automatically when it detected sound. Sunday night, David set up everything carefully. The camera pointed at his bed, the phone ready to record, and he even put a glass of water on his nightstand to see if it would move when the woman appeared. At exactly 2:30 a.m., it happened again. David felt the bed move and heard his name whispered softly. This time, he didn't try to turn on the light. Instead, he stayed still and listened. The woman seemed to stay longer than before, maybe 10 minutes. He could hear her moving slightly, like she was getting comfortable next to him. When morning came, David eagerly checked his recordings. The camera showed nothing but an empty bed all night long. The voice recorder had captured some sounds. The heating system, cars outside, but no whispered name, and no movement in his room. Even the water glass hadn't moved at all. David stared at the empty recordings in confusion. How could he feel and hear everything so clearly, but the machines detected nothing? Was he really going crazy? During his psychology class that week, David paid extra attention when his professor talked about hallucinations and sleep disorders. He learned about something called sleep paralysis, where people see and feel things that aren't really there. But his experiences didn't match what the textbook described. He could move freely, and everything felt completely real. His thesis advisor, Dr. Torres, noticed that David looked tired and distracted during their weekly meeting. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, looking concerned. "You seem exhausted lately." David wanted to tell her everything, but he was afraid she would think he was having a mental breakdown. Instead, he just said he had been having trouble sleeping and would try to get more rest. But rest was impossible. The woman came back every few nights, always between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Each time, David became more aware of details about her. She was small and thin, with skin that felt cool to the touch. Her hair smelled like shampoo mixed with that jasmine perfume. Sometimes she would place her hand gently on his chest right over his heart. David started keeping a notebook by his bed to write down everything he noticed. The scar above her eyebrow was definitely real. He could see it clearly now that he knew to look for it. She never spoke except to whisper his name, but sometimes she made small sounds, like sighs or soft breathing. The strangest part was how familiar she felt to him. Even though David was sure he had never met this woman before, something about her presence seemed natural, like she belonged there next to him. His grades started dropping because he couldn't concentrate during the day. David would sit in class, thinking about the mystery woman instead of listening to lectures. His friends noticed he was acting different, but he made excuses about being stressed with his research. One night, David tried talking to her. "Who are you?" he whispered into the darkness. "Why do you keep coming here?" The woman went very still, beside him, like she was surprised he had spoken. Then she moved closer and placed her cool hand on his cheek. David could feel her looking at him, even though he couldn't see her eyes clearly. She stayed longer that night, almost until dawn. David felt like she was trying to tell him something important, but he couldn't understand what it was. When the first light of morning started coming through his window, she faded away like always. David realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. Whatever was happening to him was getting stronger and more frequent. He needed to find answers, even if it meant people might think he was losing his mind. The next day, he decided to start investigating his apartment building and its history. Maybe someone else had experienced something similar, or maybe there was a logical explanation he hadn't thought of yet. But deep down, David was starting to believe that this woman was real in some way he didn't understand, and that she needed something from him. David couldn't take it anymore. 3 weeks of mysterious visits had left him exhausted and desperate for answers. He decided to learn everything he could about his apartment and the building he lived in. The first person he talked to was Mrs. Chen, his elderly neighbor who lived in the apartment next to his. She was a sweet Chinese woman who had been in the building for 15 years and knew everyone who came and went. "Mrs. Chen," David said when he caught her checking her mailbox one afternoon. "Can I ask you something about this building?" She looked up at him with kind eyes behind thick glasses. "Of course, dear. What would you like to know? Has anything strange ever happened here? Any unusual stories about the apartments?" Mrs. Chen's expression changed slightly. She glanced around nervously and then motioned for David to follow her into her apartment. "Sit down," she said, pouring him tea. "You're asking about apartment 2B, aren't you? Your apartment?" David nodded, his heart beating faster. "Yes? Have other people who lived there experienced anything unusual?" Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, stirring her tea slowly. "There was a girl," she finally said. "A college student like you. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Something terrible happened to her." "What kind of terrible thing?" David asked gently. "She died," Mrs. Chen whispered. "Fell from the window in your apartment. The police said it was an accident, but—" She shook her head sadly. "I don't know. She was such a quiet, nice girl. Never caused any trouble." David's blood went cold. Someone had died in his apartment, falling from his window. "Do you remember her name?" "Elena something, Spanish last name. She was studying art at the college, always carried around those big portfolios with her drawings." That night, David couldn't sleep at all. He kept staring at his window, imagining someone falling from it. When the mysterious woman appeared at 2:45 a.m., David felt different about her presence. Could this be Elena? Was he being visited by someone who had died in his own apartment? The next day, David went to the public library and searched through old newspaper files. It took him 3 hours, but he finally found what he was looking for. A small article from 5 years ago with the headline, "Local Student Dies in Apartment Fall." The article was short, but gave him the details he needed. Elena Vasquez, age 22, art major at the university. She had been found in the alley behind David's building early one morning after falling from a second-story window. The police investigation concluded it was an accidental death, possibly related to alcohol use, though her blood alcohol level was only slightly elevated. What caught David's attention were quotes from Elena's friends. They all said the same thing. Elena rarely drank alcohol and had no reason to be near an open window. Her roommate mentioned that Elena had been acting strange in the weeks before her death, talking about dreams and saying she was looking for someone important. David stared at the grainy newspaper photo of Elena Vasquez. Even in the poor-quality black and white image, he could see she had long, dark hair, and there, above her left eyebrow, was a small scar, exactly like the one he had been seeing on his mysterious visitor. His hands shook as he realized what this meant. The woman coming to his room every few nights was Elena, the same person who had died falling from his window 5 years ago. But why was she appearing to him? What connection could they possibly have? David spent the rest of the week trying to find more information about Elena. He looked up her college records, found her old professors, and even tracked down some of her former classmates through social media. Elena's art professor, Mr. Williams, still taught at the university. David made an appointment to see him, pretending he was doing research on student mental health for his psychology degree. Elena Vasquez, Mr. Williams said thoughtfully when David mentioned her name. Yes, I remember her well. Talented artist, but she struggled with depression in her final semester. What kind of art did she create? David asked. Mr. Williams pulled out an old portfolio from his filing cabinet. I kept some of her pieces. Her work became very dark toward the end. Look at these. The drawings made David's stomach turn. They were self-portraits, but Elena had drawn herself looking sad and empty, sometimes with tears, sometimes surrounded by darkness. In several pictures, she had drawn herself falling or floating, as if she was already seeing her own death. She talked about dreams a lot in those final weeks, Mr. Williams continued. Said she kept dreaming about someone who would understand her pain. She became obsessed with the idea that this person was real and that she had to find them. Did she ever describe this person from her dreams? David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. A young man, she said. Kind eyes, gentle face. She drew him a few times. Mr. Williams flipped through the portfolio and pulled out a sketch. David's heart stopped. The drawing showed a man who looked exactly like him. Same hair, same facial structure, same eyes. Elena had been dreaming about David before she ever met him. She spent her last weeks trying to figure out who this person was, Mr. Williams said. Elena was convinced he lived somewhere near campus. She would walk around the neighborhood for hours looking for him. David left the professor's office in a daze. Elena had been searching for him before she died. Somehow in her dreams, she had seen David's face and become convinced that he was someone important to her life. But the biggest shock came when David visited the University Counseling Center. Elena had donated her personal journal to them before her death, hoping it might help other students who struggled with depression. With special permission from Dr. Torres, who knew the counseling director, David was allowed to read Elena's journal. Her final entries made everything clear. I found him, Elena had written just 2 days before her death. His name is David Martinez. He lives in apartment 2B on Elm Street. I've been watching him walk to campus, and he's exactly the person from my dreams. Tomorrow I'm going to knock on his door and introduce myself. The final entry, written on the day she died, was even more revealing. I waited outside his building all day, but I lost my courage. He looks so peaceful and intelligent. What if he thinks I'm crazy for following him? I'll try again tomorrow. I know he's the one who can help me feel less alone in this world. David sat in the counseling center, staring at Elena's words with tears in his eyes. She had planned to meet him the day she died. She had been watching him, trying to work up the courage to introduce herself. But instead of meeting him in life, she had fallen from his window and died. Now David understood why Elena kept appearing in his room. She had been trying to reach him for years, even after death. The connection she felt in her dreams had been real, and somehow her spirit was still trying to complete the meeting that never happened when she was alive. That night, when Elena appeared in his bed at 2:30 a.m., David was ready for her. This time, he wasn't going to let fear or confusion stop him from understanding what she needed. When Elena appeared that night, David was sitting up in bed waiting for her. The familiar jasmine scent filled his room as she climbed under the covers next to him. But this time, instead of lying still in fear, David turned toward her in the darkness. Elena, he whispered softly. I know who you are now. The woman went completely still beside him. David could feel her surprise, like electricity in the air between them. For the first time since these visits began, she didn't whisper his name. Instead, she seemed to be listening, waiting for him to continue. I found your journal, David said gently. I know you were looking for me before you died. I know you saw me in your dreams. Elena moved closer to him, and David could feel her cool hand reaching for his face in the darkness. When her fingers touched his cheek, they felt more solid than ever before, more real. It was like she was becoming stronger now that he knew the truth. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me," David continued. "If I had known you were trying to find me, I would have helped you. I would have been your friend." Elena's hand stayed on his cheek, and David thought he could feel wetness there like tears. Even though he still couldn't see her clearly, he sensed that she was crying. Over the next few weeks, their nighttime meetings changed completely. Elena began staying longer, sometimes until just before dawn. She would sit next to David while he talked to her about his life, his studies, his dreams for the future. Even though she rarely spoke, David could feel her listening to every word. During the day, David threw himself into researching everything he could about life after death and unexplained phenomena. His psychology background helped him understand that some scientists believed consciousness might exist beyond what we could measure. There were theories about energy patterns and quantum fields that could explain how Elena might still be present in some form. David also learned more about Elena's life from her former classmates. They painted a picture of a lonely, sensitive young woman who struggled to connect with others. She was incredibly talented as an artist, but she often felt misunderstood and isolated. One of her roommates, Lisa, met David for coffee and shared more details about Elena's final weeks. "She became obsessed with this recurring dream," Lisa explained. "She would wake up talking about this man with kind eyes, who she said could understand her in ways nobody else could. At first we thought it was just her imagination, but she started drawing him over and over." Lisa showed David photos on her phone of more drawings Elena had made. They were all of David's face, drawn with incredible detail and accuracy. In some pictures, Elena had drawn herself and David together, talking or sitting peacefully side by side. She was convinced he was real, and that finding him would change her life, Lisa continued. Elena spent hours walking around campus and the neighborhood looking for this person from her dreams. The day before she died, she came home excited, saying she had finally found him. David's heart ached as he realized how close they had come to meeting while Elena was still alive. If only she had knocked on his door that day instead of losing her courage, maybe everything would have been different. That night, when Elena appeared in his room, David decided to tell her what he had learned. "I met your friend Lisa today," he said softly. "She told me how you used to draw pictures of me, even before you found out where I lived. Elena, how did you know what I looked like? How could you dream about someone you had never met?" For the first time, Elena spoke more than just his name. Her voice was soft and distant, like it was coming from far away. "I was lost," she whispered, so lonely and sad. "I prayed every night for someone who would understand me, someone who wouldn't judge me for being different. Then I started dreaming about you." David felt tears in his own eyes as he listened to her words. "In my dreams, you would talk to me for hours," Elena continued. "You never made me feel weird or broken. You listened to my thoughts about art and life and death. You made me feel like I wasn't alone in the world." "But how was that possible?" David asked. "I never dreamed about you until after you died." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maybe some connections exist before we even meet. Maybe my soul was calling out to yours, even across time and space." David had studied enough psychology to know that some researchers believed in phenomena like telepathic connections and shared consciousness. While it wasn't proven by traditional science, there were documented cases of people having unexplained psychic links with strangers. "Elena," David said carefully, "why do you keep coming to me now? What do you need?" "I need to know that people like you really exist," she whispered. "In life, I felt so different from everyone around me. I was afraid that I would never find someone who could see the world the way I did. But you do see it that way, don't you, David?" David thought about his own struggles with feeling different and misunderstood. His deep interest in consciousness and unexplained phenomena often made him feel isolated from his classmates. He had always been more sensitive and empathetic than most people, which sometimes made social situations difficult for him. Yes, he answered honestly. I do see the world differently than most people. I think about big questions that others don't seem interested in. I feel things very deeply, sometimes too deeply. Elena's presence seemed to grow warmer and more peaceful beside him. I knew it, she said softly. I could feel your kindness, even before I found you. That's why my dreams led me to you. As the weeks continued, David began to understand that Elena's visits weren't just about her needing help. They were also helping him. Through their conversations, David started to accept parts of himself that he had always tried to hide. Elena's acceptance of his sensitivity and deep thinking made him feel less alone in the world, too. Dr. Torres noticed that David seemed more confident and focused in his studies. His thesis about consciousness and unexplained phenomena was becoming groundbreaking work that impressed his professors. You seem different lately, Dr. Torres observed during one of their meetings. More sure of yourself and your research direction. David smiled, thinking about his nighttime conversations with Elena. I've found some inspiration for my work, he said. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected places. But David also sensed that something was changing in Elena's visits. She seemed more at peace now, less desperate and sad. He began to wonder if their connection was helping her find the closure she needed to move on from this world. 2 months had passed since Elena first appeared in David's room. Their nighttime conversations had become the most meaningful part of his life. Through Elena, David had learned to accept his sensitive nature and see it as a gift rather than a weakness. But lately, Elena seemed different. Her presence felt lighter somehow, less tied to sadness and desperation. David sensed that she was finding peace, and part of him worried about what that might mean for their connection. On a quiet Tuesday night in early December, Elena appeared in David's room one final time, but this visit was unlike all the others. When David reached for his bedside lamp, Elena didn't disappear. The light revealed her clearly for the first time. She was exactly as he had imagined, young and beautiful, with long dark hair and the small scar above her left eyebrow. But now she looked peaceful, almost glowing with a soft light that seemed to come from within her. You can see me, Elena said with wonder in her voice. Really see me. David nodded, amazed that she remained solid and present even in the bright lamplight. You look different tonight. Stronger. Elena smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. I feel different. For the first time since I died, I feel complete. She moved closer and placed her hand over David's heart, just as she had done so many times before, but now her touch felt warm instead of cool. David, I need to tell you something important, Elena said. Our connection isn't just about me finding peace. It's about you finding your purpose, too. What do you mean? David asked, though part of him already knew. You have a gift for helping people who feel lost and different just like I did. Your empathy and understanding can save lives, but you've been hiding from that calling because you were afraid of being judged. David felt tears building in his eyes. Elena was right. He had always been drawn to helping people with mental health struggles, but he had been too afraid of seeming strange or different to fully embrace that path. There are so many people out there who feel the way I did when I was alive, Elena continued. Lonely, misunderstood, convinced that nobody could ever truly see them. They need someone like you, David. Someone who understands that being different isn't the same as being broken. Elena stood up from the bed and moved to David's window, the same window she had fallen from 5 years earlier. But now there was no sadness or fear in her movements. She looked peaceful and purposeful. I was supposed to meet you that day I died, she said, looking out at the quiet street below. Not to be saved, but to save you. To help you understand your true calling. But you did die, David said softly. How could that have been part of the plan? Elena turned back to him with a gentle smile. Sometimes the most important meetings happen in ways we never expect. Death isn't an ending, David. It's just a different way of existing. My spirit found you because our connection was stronger than physical death. David understood now why Elena had been able to appear to him when no one else could see her. Their connection transcended the normal boundaries of life and death because it served a higher purpose. What happens now? David asked. Will I still see you? Elena walked back to him and cupped his face in her hands. You don't need to see me anymore, David. You have everything you need inside yourself now. But I want you to know that our connection will never truly end. Every time you help someone who feels lost and alone, part of my spirit will be there with you. Elena leaned forward and gently kissed David's forehead. Her touch felt like warm sunlight, filling him with peace and confidence. Promise me something, she whispered. Promise me you'll use your gift to help others. Don't hide your sensitivity anymore. The world needs more people like you. I promise, David said, meaning it completely. Elena smiled one last time and then she began to fade away like morning mist. But unlike her previous disappearances, this felt final and peaceful. She was choosing to leave because her purpose had been fulfilled. Thank you, David. Her voice echoed softly as she disappeared. Thank you for helping me find peace and for letting me help you find your purpose. The jasmine scent lingered in David's room for hours after Elena was gone, but it no longer felt sad or mysterious. It felt like a blessing, a reminder of the beautiful connection they had shared. The next morning, David called Dr. Torres and asked to change his thesis focus completely. Instead of studying sleep disorders, he wanted to research therapeutic approaches for helping people who felt isolated and misunderstood. Dr. Torres was surprised, but supportive of the change. David also volunteered at the campus counseling center, offering to help students who struggled with depression and feelings of alienation. He discovered that he had a natural ability to make people feel heard and understood, just as Elena had said he would. Years passed, and David became Dr. David Martinez, a respected psychologist who specialized in helping people who felt different or outcast by society. His therapy practice was known throughout the region for its compassionate approach and remarkable success rate. David never married, but he was never lonely. He carried Elena's love and wisdom with him every day, and he felt her presence whenever. He helped someone find hope in their darkest moments. On the anniversary of Elena's death each year, David would place a small bouquet of jasmine flowers on her grave. He would tell her about the lives he had helped save, the people he had guided from despair to hope, the students he had taught to embrace their sensitivity as a strength. David's office wall was covered with thank you letters from former patients, each one representing a life that had been touched by the connection he and Elena had shared. Some letters were from teenagers who had been considering suicide but found reasons to live. Others were from adults who had finally learned to accept themselves after years of feeling broken. Every letter reminded David that love and understanding could transcend even death itself, and that sometimes the most important meetings happen in the most unexpected ways. In his final years, David would often tell his students and colleagues that the greatest discoveries in psychology came not from textbooks or research studies, but from opening our hearts to connections that defied logical explanation. Elena had been right. Their meeting had changed everything, not just for David, but for every person whose life he had touched with the compassion and understanding she had helped him discover within himself. And sometimes, late at night when David was helping someone, in crisis he would catch the faintest scent of jasmine in the air and smile, knowing that Elena's spirit was still there, still helping him save the lost and lonely souls of the world.